Hello respected viewers, I'm George from Ireland. Here I am in London town, opposite Coleherne Court. You can see the blue plaque. That is Princess Diana's former flat, so where she lived before her engagement to the Prince of Wales, that's Prince Charles. So this plaque was put up very recently, I think it's this year actually, because blue plaques can only be erected to someone over a century after the person's birth or over 20 years after the person's death, whichever is sooner. Now, Lady Diana Spencer, as she was born on the 3rd of July, 1961. And if memory serves, she's born at Althorp, which was the family seat in Norfolk. So her father was Earl Spencer, Earl being a hereditary noble title, not his personal name. His name was John. So most peers of the realm, if they got the title Viscount or above, it's named after a place. It's not their surname. They're unusual that the surname is Spencer and the title was also Spencer, Earl Spencer, not Earl of Spencer. You're only of a place, not of your surname. So she was the third daughter, and she lamented, "I was supposed to be a boy." But then her brother, Charles, is that right? Was born a couple of years later. So she was a distant relative to Winston Churchill. So because of course Churchill's surname was actually Spencer Churchill. She was also descended from one of Charles II's mistresses. Therefore Prince Charles was her very distant cousin. Their family's trees had branched off about 300 years before Princess Diana was born, so about 10 generations earlier. Anyway, so she went to a school called Westheath. She was rather short on the grey matter, as she later said to a child to try and encourage some child, "Well, I'm a complete thicko," which was really picked up by the press. Now, though that was rather abrasive, that was definitely true. She wasn't a clever person, doesn't make her a bad person. She may have had other gifts, though I'm not really aware of them. She's said to have had the common touch. So Princess Diana, she later went to a finishing school in Switzerland, which no longer exists. In fact, finishing schools overall don't exist, where these upper class girls would go for anything from a year, from a term to a year, and they do a bit of English, a bit of maths, and they'd learn cooking and also how to lay a table. Not that they'd really be cooking as the chatelaine or whichever stately home it was, but simply so they could superintend the servants and make sure they were doing things properly. How to laugh at unfunny jokes at a country house weekend, deportment and so on, how to behave. So that sort of thing was dying even in the late 70s when she went there. She'd left school age 17. I think she got one O-level. We didn't have GCSEs back then. Ordinary level, which she took at 16 in what's the word? Home economics, which is cooking in plain English. Anyway, so then she came to Londinium, and her parents had bought this flat here. Now, Earl's Court is this area. It was not as salubrious back then as it is today. You may have seen the Crown series saying, "Where's she living?" "Oh, Earl's Court. Oh, only Australians and prostitutes live there." But is there a difference? She was presumed to have kept her maidenhood. So she was Virginia intacta, so reputation has it. But before long, she was stepping out with the heir to the throne. So he briefly had a dalliance with one of her elder sisters, but that didn't go anywhere. It was talked about that perhaps she and Prince Andrew were more suitable, as Prince Andrew was only 1 year older than her, whereas Prince Charles, who was 13 years older than her, though in personality is probably 30 years older than her, because a bit of a young fogey, Lawrence van der Post, that South African novelist, being his guru. Anyway, in the summer of 1980, she was up in Balmoral, which is the royal family's private estate in Scotland, and the press pack picked up on this, took photos of her. They found her here in London. She was working at some very posh little nursery school, and she had her own car. Shy Di was always fluttering her heavily mascaraed eyelids, and was taciturn, laconic. Perhaps she just had very little to say for herself. So seemed to be a suitable candidate because Charles had reached 30. His parents say, "You know, Charlie boy, you need to settle down now, enough sowing your wild oats," and all the rest of it. His grandfather figure, Lord Mountbatten, had been murdered in August 1979, blown up by the IRA. So he'd even proposed to Lord Mountbatten's granddaughter, who was Prince Charles's third cousin, but she'd said no. So who was he going to pick? Someone who was young, but not too young, He'd first met her when she was 16. He began his relationship with her when she was 18, and without any question mark over her reputation. A bit empty-headed would be good. You don't want someone who's always opining, and healthy, good-looking, Church of England or willing to convert, and she seemed to tick all the right boxes. So that November, it was announced that they'd got engaged. They did that rather cringe-worthy photo call on a sofa in Buckingham Palace. The journalist asked, "Are you in love?" And there is Diana, who's sort of 19 going on 9, saying, "Of course." And she can barely susurrate because she's so bashful. And Prince Charles says, well, whatever in love means, of course. He's always too brutally candid. Anyway, so they were going ahead. The date was penciled in to get married in July 1981. It would just be days after Princess Diana was due to turn 20. And according to the Diana Gate tapes, which were released which she made in the early 90s, she got cold feet about it. She wanted to back out. And her sisters, who called her Dutch, said, "It's too late, Dutch. Your face is already on the tea towels." Because breaking off any engagement is a major undertaking, but especially when you're marrying what was seen to be the most eligible bachelor in the world. But the wedding went ahead. It was the most viewed wedding of all time, the wedding of the century, this fairy tale wedding in St. Paul's Cathedral, celebrated by the Archbishop of Canterbury. And many crown heads were there, not the King of Spain, because going via Gibraltar was part of the honeymoon itinerary. And the Greek government didn't send anyone because the British royal family had invited ex-King Constantine of Greece, their kinsman. So the Greeks took umbrage with that. Our president, the Irish president, he didn't come because there was some disagreement over people starving themselves to death in prisons in Northern Ireland. Anyway, so she married him, and but 11 months later, they were delivered of a bonny baby boy. That's Prince William. And then Prince Harry followed in September 1984. But a marriage was going wrong later on. Prince Charles, his first love, his only love really, was Camilla Shand, as she was, who'd married Parker Bowles, Andrew Parker Bowles, who was a cavalry officer, indeed who was part of the escort, riding beside the happy couple, the newlyweds in 1981. And indeed, Mrs. Parker Bowles was actually in the congregation of St. Paul's Cathedral. So Princess Diana claims to have found these C and C cufflinks intertwined that Prince Charles had, as in Charles and Camilla, and claims that she'd overheard him saying before they got married on the phone to someone, "You know, no matter what happens, I shall always love you." She presumed it was Camilla he was on the phone to. Another thing is, she'd gone on a 2-week holiday to Australia. He'd proposed to her, said, "Don't answer me just yet. Take a fortnight to think about it." He later acknowledged he hadn't called her for that whole 2 weeks. I mean, if Diana's to be believed, his behaviour was highly erratic towards her. Some weeks calling every day, and then let a couple of weeks go by with nary a word. But their marriage, it gang awry by the late 80s, and he'd resumed his liaison with Mrs. Parker Bowles, so it was a double adultery. As he subsequently admitted in October 1995, in that bombshell interview with, who was it, Dimbleby, Jonathan Dimbleby, saying, "I was faithful to this marriage until it became irretrievably broken down," and it all went wrong. Anyway, they got divorced. That was finalised in January 1997. She got a payout of several million. She was still a princess. She lost the handle, Her Royal Highness, and she died in a car crash. She finally died at Hôpital Salpêtrière on the 1st of September 1997 in Paris. Flown back here for a state funeral, and then laid to rest on an island in a lake on her brother's estate. Her brother then became Earl Spencer. So that is her. She'd had a relationship with various others after divorce, including Dodi Fayed, not Al Fayed, tell the truth about his name, that Egyptian Emirati playboy whose father owned Harrods at the time. Well, my battery's about to run out. That's enough about Princess Diana. She shared this flat with a few friends, and the paparazzo were always staking it out. In 1980, when she was still living here. Once she got engaged, she moved into Buckingham Palace to live under the Queen's supervision. There's another film out about her called Spencer. So many films out about her, including called Whatever Love Means. So that's enough from me, George from Ireland. Please subscribe to my channel and donate to me most liberally on PayPal. All right, everyone, toodaloo.